So today's agenda kind of overview, we're going to discuss the different CAMWorks license types real quick, and then we're going to go to advantages of a floating network license and review some of the terminology that's in the floating network licenses. And then we're going to do some of the floating network license requirements, recommendations, and then we'll do a presentation on setting up a floating network license. And then we'll discuss the differences between checking out and borrowing modules, and a presentation on checking out modules, and a presentation on borrowing modules. And then we'll have a Q&A session here at the end. But again, if you have questions, feel free to type them in at any time. So, kind of go through the license types real quick. The first license type is the hardware type. It is a dongle or a key. It's a hardware device that serves as a copy protection for CAMWorks by rendering the software inoperable when the device is not attached to the computer. So the CAMWorks license is programmed and flashed onto this device, which is plugged into the computer's LPT port or USB port. The copy protection device CPD number is on the number printed on the dongle. Okay, one big note there, the Microsoft Windows requires the Sentinel device driver to be installed on the computer or to detect that hardware device. So the dongle looks just kind of a lot like a flash drive. You can see some different CAMWorks dongles we've had over the years of what they look like. So they look like that there in the picture. And again, that is a hardware device that plugs right into the computer, and Windows requires a driver for that as well. So the license is stored on that guy. And we only require those for only the hardware types license, which we only have one hardware type. Okay, the next type we have is the software types. And there are two software types of licenses we offer. One is the standalone node lock license. This method uses authorization codes to activate a single seat license to a specific computer. The software must be registered and that computer's information submitted via a generated license request file. HCL Geometric generates the license file per the info in that license request file. So kind of what this is going on is first you must use the CAMWorks License Manager to do a software license, including a standalone node lock. And that license request captures your MAC address, and they encrypt a code back to you in that license file. That license will only work on that given MAC address. And the standalone license is for a single designated computer, and it's not to be used over network. It's for one computer, one PC, so that license will always work on just that one computer. Okay. The next big one here that the main focus we're going to focus on today is the floating network license type. It is also a software type. It also uses the CAMWorks License Manager. And it does not require a dongle as well. I know some people's floating network license also require a dongle. Ours does not. It is all strictly software type on our floating network license. Okay. And floating network license, this method also uses authorization codes to activate single or multiple seat license to a specific host computer, such as a server, which hosts the license. And then the multiple client computers can then reference this host computer, which then distributes the license modules out across the network. The software must be registered, and that hosting computer's information is submitted via generated license request file, similar to the standalone network license. And then HCL generates the license file per that info in that license request file. So its license too is read in through the MAC address of that computer, and it's encrypted, and it is licensed across that to only work on that license will be hosted on that server or host computer, and then can be distributed among multiple computers, and like here in the diagram. So you can have the license server here, and this is a diagram duplex for two current users, so it's got two seats, so two guys can check out a license from the single computer. And these other guys can't use it because that's only got two seats and it's in use. Now these guys over here can release that license back to the license server, and then one of these other guys could check it out. So that's kind of the concept of the floating network license. Now one way I like to kind of simplify how the floating network license work is I like to use an analogy of a library and checking out a book. I like to call this server or hosted computer, aka the library. And then CAMWorks has all these modules such as 2.5 axis milling, 3 axis milling, turning. I like to call those individual modules books. So let's say you have the library has 2 copies of 2.5 axis milling. Okay, sitting there available for people to check out and aka read that book. So that means up to 2 users can check out that license from the book and read that book. Now, if there's only the book called 3-Axis Milling and there's only one of those available in the library, that means 1 user can check it out and read the book. No one else can read that 3-Axis Milling book until that user's return it back to the library so someone else can check it out. So the floating network license works very similar to that same concept as checking a book in and out of the library. So I hope that makes sense and helps clarify of how the floating network license functions. So then kind of the advantages and disadvantages of floating licenses is a common question here. So we'll review that real quick. Some of the advantages: the licenses are available to all workstations connected to the company's network because it's typically hosted on that server. So it's maximizing the software asset utilization. So that means different computers can use it up to the number of seats available. Okay, licenses are then shared between multiple workstations, which is an advantage. So you can have 1 seat of license, 1 seat of 2.5 milling, but 2 different people can use it. They just can't use it at the same time. They can be floated from one computer to the other person's computer. Okay, that's cost effective, so less licenses are required when a company has many users. So if you have 2 different users, they're using software at different times, you can buy 1 license. Okay, and then when the application is closed, that license is released back to a central pool so it's available for other users. So that's kind of nice there. Let's say if you have 1 computer, guy uses a 3rd shift programmer. If he's only got a standalone license, no one else can use it except his computer on 3rd shift. So whereas if he turns his computer off, the guy on 1st shift can use it, type concept. So those are the big advantages there. Now, some of the disadvantages of floating network is when the server network is down, all users lose access to the software because its license can't be obtained if it can't talk to the server or the hosting computer. One of the other disadvantages is that it's more expensive than comparable standalone licenses. So there is a charge for a floating network license type, an upcharge on it. That's because it's got more technical support and more software, additional software development has to occur to do a floating network license, which we will see the different license and software manager here shortly. And then it's a disadvantage too that it's not as suitable for single user installations. So typically it's best for single users to just, they're always going to use the license to stay standalone network. And kind of defeats the purpose if you only have 1 computer at one time, all the time, using the license of the floating network. But it can be done. So there's some quick advantages and disadvantages of a floating network license. And then one of the other disadvantages of floating network licenses is more complex to set up. So as you'll see, there's more steps to set up and configure a floating network license. And then some quick terminology to help clarify some things as we're discussing and setting things up here. So I thought we would define some common terminology that we use when we're discussing floating network licenses. Okay. First of all, the host computer. The host computer is the computer that communicates with other computers on the network, which will distribute the license to those other computers. It is typically a server. CAMWorks does not necessarily have to be used on this computer, but it can. The license is licensed to its MAC address. So the hosted computer is typically a server, and that's going to host and hold the licenses on a floating network license. Then there's the client workstation computers. They're computers network that do run CAMWorks. They will look back at the host license to get the license from the hosting computer. So the one big one here is the license version date. The license version date is the license date required for that given version of CAMWorks. So when you guys purchase CAMWorks USP, you're given a date, and you can run any version up until that date of CAMWorks that's out. Okay, and that date when you purchase USP is the support USP expiration date. That expiration date in your license is where it will halt access to any version where the license version date exceeds it. So such as CAMWorks 2020 Service Pack 1 requires a license date of, I think, January 15th, 2020. If your license date is older than that, you won't be authorized to run that version. Then you can renew it, your USP date, and then that'll extend your date, and then you could then run that software. Perpetual licenses are never-ending licenses. All CAMWorks licenses are perpetual licenses, unless for some reason they put a timer on it because of, they're waiting on payment confirmations or someone to return a license if you're transferring a license. But they are perpetual licenses, they're never ending. That means you can run any version of software going backwards in time that came out before this date. Okay? You cannot run any version of software that comes out after your USP expiration date is what that means. So in every software's version and service pack has its different license version date requirement. So I hope that clarifies some terms here. I'm going to go over some additional requirements for a floating network license and also some recommendations real quick. So some quick requirements here. For floating network licenses, it does require the CAMWorks License Manager. The CAMWorks License Manager is a FlexLM based, so it uses the FlexLM kernel in the background of the CAMWorks License Manager. It does require a Microsoft Windows network. It also requires a network adapter on that computer. The host computer must contain a static MAC address. This is a pretty big one because its license is licensed to the MAC address of that computer. One of the big common exceptions is here is questions that come up are virtual computers. Yes, CAMWorks License Manager can license to a virtual computer. The one big thing is with that is that virtual computer must have a static MAC address. If that virtual computer does not have a static MAC address, that MAC address will then change and the license will then fail because it's only licensed to, it's encrypted to only allow that given computer, that given MAC address to function. So virtual computers can be done. It's a little bit tricky, a little more support, but that's just because of the static MAC address requirement. And there are options when you set up a virtual computer to ensure that that's a static MAC address. So you want to make sure it's not dynamic because it'll change the host ID or MAC address on you, and then all of a sudden the license will stop and fail. Another requirement here, installation configuration must occur from administrator account. So always when you're installing or adjusting the license configurations, you always want to do that from an administrator account. That's because once it's configured, the other users will inherit those license settings. Windows will write those settings in the Windows registry for all users if you have administrative rights when you configure it, and then all users will inherit those settings on that computer. So that's a must here. Also, when we get in license borrowing, it does require you to have administrator privileges, which we'll go over here shortly. Some recommendations for ultimate success here with the floating network license. We recommend the same CAMWorks License Manager version that's on the hosting computer and the client computers. So we're going to keep those the exact same version. That seems to keep things more flawlessly running. And one thing I like to note, CAMWorks 20, when it came out, did have an all-new license manager. So if you have not updated your server when you're going to update CAMWorks 20, I would also update this license manager version on that server or hosting computer. We do recommend a wired gigabit network connection. The faster the better. That way you don't have any delays on the licensing or anything like that. Because the CAMWorks will check back to the hosting server periodically during the session as you're using it to make sure it can still obtain a license. So I don't know what the interval is, but they do check it here and there every time you do different things through the session. So it maintains the connection network. So a good, stable, fast network is always best. Some people try wireless. I'm not a fan of wireless because wireless will drop in and out, and it can drop the connection and cause delays and issues as your program. If it can't find a license, it'll stop access to the software. So wireless is not the most reliable, although it is user-friendly as far as easy access stuff, but again, it's not the most reliable because it can drop out, especially when you get into machine shops where there's a lot of static electricity going through the air from all the high voltage stuff around. Wireless is usually just not as strong. So we do recommend a wired gigabit connection for doing floating network licenses. They're just much more robust. And then the other big one here, with flow network licenses, there's a lot of computers all have security software nowadays in them, and firewalls, including Windows itself has the firewalls. And it's just best to always configure the security firewall software so that the applications techsoft.exe and lmgr.exe are allowed exceptions on the host computer typically. Both files are located in the installation folder of the CAMWorks License Manager here. So the techsoft.exe and the lmgr.exe are in the License Manager folder. So it's best just to go ahead and give those the security software permission to allow those to run, and that way there's no hiccups going forward. Because I've seen where the license manager is working, everything's working great one day, and then the security softwares will put an update to make things more secure, and all of a sudden the license will start failing. And then we have to come back and manually put these exceptions in. So my recommendation is just go ahead and put them right out of the gate, and that way there's no interference or lag as if the security software is analyzing to see if it's good or not, and then permit it. So the things just work a lot smoother and faster by putting those exceptions in right out of the gate. And then the big one is the host computer should remain on the network and always be powered up. Yes, I know, things can happen, power goes down, but you want to typically keep it on the network where it is under power, so that means people can use and check out the licenses throughout the day, that type thing. I don't suggest putting them on like a laptop and someone taking the laptop home. So if the host computer is on a laptop, someone took it home to work from home that day, no one can get a license from it because they're home and off the network. So hosting them is best to host the hosting computer to be one that typically remains on the network and always powered up, which is typically a server. And then we always recommend to specify a port number. And that's done in the licensing setup and installation, and that port number can be done. We do recommend doing that. Things seem faster when you use the port, and there's some times when you have multiple softwares going on, it's best just to switch from the default FlexLM port to a different port, just because there's less traffic in that port going on for interference. So there are times when we have to pump them through a different port number. So those tend to keep things running more robust there. You follow those recommendations. Now we're going to jump in here and go ahead and start the actual process to set up a floating network license. So I'm going to go ahead and remote into my server here. So I'm going to use my remote desktop and remote right into our server here at CAMS. And we're going to install the CAMWorks License Manager, which I have the installation right here. This is the latest build that I've downloaded from CAMWorks.com, and it's the 2020 build here. So I'm going to right-click on this, and always right-click Run as Administrator when you install the License Manager. So I'm going to simply go ahead and install this on our domain server here at CAMS. Okay, the installation here is pretty quick. You can start the License Manager up here. I usually don't. I'm just going to go ahead and hit Finish. And that will add it to your Start menu, and I actually have an icon here that I like to keep on the desktop on our server here. And one thing to note, I always, as I talked about, run as administrator, even though if you're administrator, and that ensures things are wrote to the registry properly for all users. I even do that on the host computer or the server computer. So I always right-click on it and say Run as Administrator when I launch that application. And the License Manager comes up here. Okay, and this is the new build. There are some things different in the new build for 2020. They've moved things around, and I think it's for the better to help clarify things. So we're going to jump over here to the License Setup tab, and we're going to tell it we want to set up a FlexLM software type license and a floating network server. And I'm going to type the name of my server here and my port number. That's the default port number. And then coming down here, this will give a summary of my computer's name that I'm remoted into and the host ID, which is the MAC address. Now, where sometimes you'll get a notice, which you'll see here, that's coming up here where it does not recommend remoting in. That's because some remoting in software will actually cause it to get not the MAC address of the computer you're remoting into, but rather the MAC address of the computer you are remoting in from. So it's always best to see what MAC address you're remoting into, that this MAC host ID matches the MAC address. So while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and do that real fast. I'm going to just go ahead and check my MAC address to make sure that I have that. And I can just go to the command prompt, run ipconfig all. And you shall see my physical address, which is the MAC address on my computer, the 1866DA6E8F37, which is this guy right here. So that means we're picking up the actual host ID MAC address of the computer I want. So that's a good thing. Now, the one thing that's different in the license managers is the request license, because you always have to request a license and submit that license request file to HCL, the developers at CAMWorks, because they host they're the ones that actually license the product. CAMs can't license, we sell it, we're a reseller. They do all licensing. Is for floating network license, that request license button is grayed out right here. For floating network license, they moved it over to the server settings tab. So in the server settings tab, this is where you start setting up your computer to use it as the hosting computer. I like to talk about as the license server. So I'm going to go ahead and use that button, and I'm going to request that license right here now for a floating network license. And they're now going to start doing serial numbers. We don't have one yet, so we're not going to worry about that, entering that. So I'm going to check mark I don't have that. I'm going to enter my legit contact information here, because they do cross-reference and verify this information here to make sure that you're the purchaser of the license. That's how they're going to find that you purchased it before they issue the license. So they're cross-referencing that. So it's critical to use accurate information here, and it should match the company name and address when you guys purchase the software. This is the port number. This is the default port number, 27,000. If you want to use a number here, different, change it here, and then they'll send you a license back with that correct port number. And I've read and agreed to those. I don't have email abilities on my server, so I'm not going to hit that button. I'm just going to go ahead and hit Open in Windows Explorer. Oh, and this is going to give me the warning about the remote connections, because it's detected that I'm using a remote desktop. So that's, again, why I check the MAC address and host ID. To ensure that's good, I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And then it created that license file for me to go ahead and email in here. What that's telling me, well, first it's telling me about the serial numbers coming out. And then it's created the license request file where that's located. So I want to go ahead and email that to gt.register@hcl.com or register@camworks.com will work as well. So I'll go ahead and OK that. I'm going to go ahead and close that. And we will go ahead and grab that file here to show you. That's the license request file I just created, and that file needs to be emailed into the gt.register@hcl.com or register@camworks.com. And then you'll send that to them. They'll read this in, because this captured your MAC address, and they'll send you a license back that's encrypted for that MAC address. So we've already done that process ahead of time for sake of the webinar here today. So I already have my license file. Right here's my license file that they emailed me back. And by the way, you might have to transfer this to a different computer to send it to a computer that has the abilities, email abilities. And the same thing with the license file. When they email it back to you, you want to transfer it to the server somewhere where you can grab it and copy it in. So I've got that my license file they emailed me back right here. I'm going to go ahead and copy it, and I'm going to paste it right here in the default, and I want to paste it, not paste shortcut. Okay. So I have a copy of my license file right in the C drive CW License Manager folder. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and close that, and I'm right here back in my license server settings tab. I'm going to continue setting those things up right here. But first, before I go through and start filling this out, one thing I like to do, and I typically do this when right after I send the license request file in, because I'm going to wait for them to send me the license back. It usually takes 1 to 2 business days. I like to go ahead and adjust my firewall settings we talked about as a best practice to make sure those processes go through. So we're going to go ahead and right here on this host computer, launch my control panel. We use the Windows firewall here on this server, so I'm going to allow an application through the firewall. I'm going to browse for it here. In the license manager folder, I'm going to grab the lmgrd.exe one, open that guy up. which is the FlexLR software here. Add that guy, and I want that to run through my domain, private, and we'll do public. Okay, we're going to allow another app to go through here, and I'm going to browse. And I will need the techsoft.exe one. Add that. That's the geometric domain. I'm going to allow it through by domain and public. And then this one's optional. You don't always have to do it. I like to go ahead and do it, and that's the actual CAMWorks License Manager itself, because I've seen some security softwares block it as well. That's pretty rare, but I'll go ahead and I'll do it anyway, just for the sake of conversation here. So I'm going to add it as well, and I want to allow that to run through the domain and public. So now I've put in my firewall exceptions, and that just keeps performance down, and that way I know it's not checking those every time we hit the license, just to, things for performance and stability. So license file path, that license manager here. I'm just going to go ahead and browse to that license file that I saved, which is the default location. I'll open that guy up. Hit install license service. This service here will take a minute or two to start. So that's good. And then the start license service. And this one couldn't take a minute or two depending on how many services you got running on your computer. But that guy's up and running here. I got a summary down here. The license service is running, so that's good. And it's got some information here, the port number, license. So I like that. This is looking very good and promising right here. I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. I'm going to jump over here to the status tab and see the authorization. The status is succeeded, so that's good. This means this guy is up and running on the hosting computer. Server name and port number, those are important information to configure the client computers. So got my license set up here, and again, this is kind of like to summarize this here is license setup tab. This is what my client computers are going to be configured like. They're going to be set to FlexLM, floating network, my server name, and my port number. So all my clients need to be set to that to get it. And I do like to review the authorized modules while I'm here real quick to see and double check all the modules that I purchased and my number of seat counts that I have. And you can see this right here shows me the support USP expiry date is February 28, 2021. So that means I can run any CAMWorks version that comes out before this date. Any version that comes out after this date, my license will no longer be good for. So I'd have to renew my USP to get that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. So we're up and going on the server, so that's good. So I'm going to go ahead and OK that. And I'm going to disconnect here from my server because I'm done with it. And I'm going to go ahead and launch the license manager on my client computer because I'm on my client computer here. I'm going to go to my start menu, CAMWorks License Manager, run as administrator. It's always key to run as administrator, so it writes this to my user settings and everyone else's that may log in this computer for different usernames. You'll see that this is succeeded right now. That's because it's using a standalone node lock. I'm not using the floating network license here. I typically use a standalone node lock license. We're going to switch it over to the floating network license that we just set up, and that's done by going to the license setup tab. I want to make sure this is set to FlexLM, floating network. I'm going to type in the name of my server and my port number. I'm going to hit apply. I'm going to go back to the status tab, and you'll see that it's now succeeded. Shows the server name, port number, and that it's floating, and our CPD number here. So that's great. That means the client is now talking to the server to get a license, or it can get a license. I can go to authorized modules, and I can see all the modules that are available. We have a list of every module that there is of CAMWorks here on our server here at CAMS, and we have 25 seats of them. So it's seeing them here. That's all good. So that's how we set up in the license on the hosting, configure the license on the server hosting computer and the client computers. So we're going to jump back here to my PowerPoint presentation here and kind of go to the next step. And the next step is done on the client computers, and that is we need to check out the license or borrow the license to actually use them, because they're sitting there, they're available on our host computer. The clients are connected to their host computer to get the license, but we have to either check one out or borrow it. And kind of want to go to the difference because they're confusing terms. They're very similar. They're kind of black and white here, but we're going to go to the differences between the two. Okay. And the first one is check out modules. Okay, the checkout modules process, what that's for is, and the design intent of it is, if the client workstation is going to remain connected to the network, it's best to check out the necessary modules from within SolidWorks and CAMWorks solids. Okay, and then that's done by going to the Help menu, CAMWorks, License Info, and this window will pop up and you'll see all the available modules and the list of the modules, and you literally go down here, check the ones you want, hit update licenses, and you can check out that license you want to use. So it'll check it out just like you would check the book out of the library and obtain that license from the hosting computer, the server license. Okay, one big note here is CAMWorks icons will remain grayed out or deactivated until a license is checked out or borrowed. So that's, a lot of people will ask, why are my icons grayed out after I set up the license? It's because you have to come in and hit check out the license or borrow the license. So again, checking out a license, a quick summary is, ideally the concept is for when your computer is going to remain connected to the network. Okay. Then there's borrowing licenses. Okay. So to borrow modules, the design intent for it is if the client workstation is going to be disconnected from the network, one can borrow the modules for a user-specified time, a max of 29 days. That workstation is then disconnected from the network to work out of the office. This is getting more common here with all the work-from-home trends right now, and that's because you can check it out. Have your laptop in the office, you're connected to the network, borrow the license for 2 weeks or a week, whatever it is, and then you can take your computer off network, okay? And then you don't have to rely on a VPN connection. You will have that license you can use, and that license will automatically be returned back to the server at that end of that maximum day that you borrowed it. The only way it can return before that date is if you bring that computer back to the network, connect it, and manually return it, okay? So there's no resetting this. This is one that when you borrow it and you take it off network, it's till you do that license, because that license or module that you borrowed technically becomes a stand-alone node lock license for that computer. So how is that done? That's done by going to the CAMWorks License Manager, launch as administrator, then go to the Authorized Modules tab. And I'll show you guys that here coming up. This window up here that we showed you, the Authorized Module tab, you highlight them and you can pick your date and borrow the license. And again, icons will be grayed out within the software and deactivated until a license either checked out or borrowed. So next we're going to go ahead and check out some modules real quick. So I'll show you how to check out modules. Okay. So to check out a module, I'm going to go ahead and launch CAMWorks because I don't have SolidWorks open because I had to just switch my license. So anytime you switch licenses, it's best to do that with SolidWorks CAMWorks closed, so that when it launches, it obtains the fresh license right out of the bat. So I switched from standalone node work to floating network. And you'll see it's loading SolidWorks and loading CAMWorks. Okay. I'm going to open up a part here real quick, just to have a part open. Okay, you can see my icons are active here. That's because it automatically grabbed a license. We'll discuss that. So I'm going to go to Help, CAMWorks Layout, License Info. On the floating network license, it automatically grabbed my licenses for me. Remember the setting when I was testing things earlier. Okay. It automatically grabbed a license, so they're automatically checked out for me. And we're going to discuss that here. I'm going to go ahead and unselect all and hit update licenses, and that's going to release the license back to the server. So you can see that it is all 25 of them are available right now. I have no licenses. If I hit OK, you can see how all my icons are pretty much grayed out here because I have no license. Okay, and you'll see there's key locks on features, stuff like that, because there's no license. So we're going to go to Help, CAMWorks, License Info. I have licenses available, so I can check them out. And let's say I want to grab tune of axis milling, I can grab those. My 3-axis license, I don't know, turning, I can grab, and I'll grab my volume mill licenses. So I can either grab them all or individual ones, select them in this list, hit update licenses. It's now going to check out those licenses. So I have them, and they're here checked out. And the other thing here is to put them in the startup column. What this does here is that means the next time I start CAMWorks, it'll automatically check out that license on startup, okay? Which is why I had a license when I first started, because I had those checked. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, and now you'll see that I have my icons are available because I have licenses here. And if I were to go back into the license manager, just to show you, and go to Authorized Module tabs, you'll see I have some available and some not. All the ones that I checked out are no longer available. Okay, that means that someone else can check that out, but I have 24 of them, so more people can check it out. You can get information with the show usage to see who's checked out what as well. There's a summary report there. Okay, I can come back in here and release that license so someone else could check it out and use that license. So I'm basically going to return that book back to the library. So I'm going to go back to license info. I'll just do unselect all. Oh, here, we'll manually uncheck them. Update licenses. That released them all back. All 25 are available. I hit OK. I can't do anything in CAMWorks because I sent my license back to the server. I'm no longer using it. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and close SolidWorks here. So that's kind of the checkout module process. Okay. So again, that's the checkout module process. Again, that's done by the license manager there. Now we're going to go over the borrow modules. And that's done within the license manager to borrow the modules. So we're going to jump out of here and do that. So again, SolidWorks is closed. I'm going to go borrow it. Launch my license manager as administrator, which is required to borrow a license. I'm connected to the server. It's successful. Go over here to my authorized modules, and I have my list of modules that are all available here. And I can grab the ones I want. And again, these are so I can take it off network. I can go through here and just grab a couple of these guys. Okay, so I'm holding down control and I'm clicking right in the list, and they're highlighting. And then you'll see these options come available, and it's kind of a nice summary here how to do this. Okay, I can pick out a date and until I'm going to borrow it to. Let's say I'm going to borrow it until next Friday, the May 1st. Just those modules. I'm going to hit borrow, and that's going to detect it out here, and it's going to report on the server that it's borrowed until after the May 1st. It'll be available. So those licenses has all been deducted by one. I can go ahead and hit apply and hit OK. And then if I go ahead and launch the software, I'll automatically get those licenses that I borrowed. And again, the concept is so I can take it off network with a borrowed license. I don't have to be communicating with the server during the session. So I can open up a part, and you will see that I'm using the borrowed licenses. The icons aren't grayed out. I can take my computer off network and use those, and it doesn't have to ping back to the server. And again, one thing I like to caution when you do the borrowed modules method here is Those are, again, intended to take off network. People use a lot of caution tests because that license won't become available again until that return date's exceeded or the computer's back on the network and been returned. So this is ideal for working at home, which a lot of people are doing right now. So you can check out your license and work from home. The disadvantage is if you borrow the license, you can borrow the license and take it home. The disadvantage is once you borrow it and take it home, no one else can share and access that license with you. So that's the difference between borrowing and checking out.